We are in Acts chapter 27. The title of this message is God Always Fulfills His Promises. Now, if you guys remember, we launched this church in February. This February will be 2 years. And we are one chapter away from finishing the book. So we're going to finish this book that we launched with next Sunday. And for me, it's a little bittersweet because this has been a book that has been eye-opening to me. This has been a book that has, my filter and how I interpret the word has changed through this book. I've seen things in this book that I never saw in my 30 years of ministry, 30 years as a believer, about the all-inclusive gospel. And so for me, it's very, 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 very bittersweet. On one hand, it's like it's closing of a section of our church. On the second hand, it's like we don't get to be a one-book church. We're going to go into another book. We'll be hitting Colossians in 2 weeks. We'll start that one. Those 4 chapters will take me about 10 months to teach through, just so you know, because it's taking me. So, Acts 27. Now, God always fulfills His promises. You ever feel like God doesn't fulfill His promises to you? You ever been in that place? I remember it was November 8th, which wasn't very long ago, but it was 1998. So, 22 years ago, that I had a prophetic word from the Lord that said I would become a pastor. And so, all these things happened where I started to get these resources, got Bible college got opened up to me, I went to Bible college, did all these different things, and then every door would shut. So as I'm walking with the Lord, I happened to discover, I didn't discover, I knew this for a long time, but I happened to know that I was LGBT. And so not only did the door shut, but I was getting kicked out of church after church after church. And it's like, okay, God, your promises are a joke. This obviously either wasn't God or God doesn't fulfill His promises. And it was in 2018, 20 years later, after I got kicked out of another church, we started doing, it was actually 19 years later, we started saying, okay, I got kicked out of a church, we're going to start teaching the book of Revelation, that way we can just stay in the Word, and we'll just be a Bible study outside of the church. Well, that turned into a church launch, and it was in 2018 where I got ordained to be a pastor. 20 years after God gave a promise that I was going to be a pastor. So God always fulfills His promises. So, we're going to pick it up in Acts chapter 27. We're going to hit the whole chapter. I know we don't normally do this. Next week, we're going to hit all of chapter 20 and we'll wrap it up. But this is kind of where Paul is. He has been arrested in Jerusalem. He went to Caesarea. He was there for 2 years. Some governors switched. There was a transition of leadership. So you had Festus, or you had Felix, who was the governor. And then he kind of left Paul in prison, just kind of like not charged, but not innocent, just kind of leaving him there. He leaves office, he's removed from office, and Festus comes in, and Festus is now taking on the case, finds out that Paul hasn't been charged with anything, wants to take him back to Jerusalem to face his accusers. It's illegal to do that, so Paul seeks permission. So Paul appeals to Caesar, saying, no, I want to go to Caesar. And now Festus has a problem, because you can't send someone and give them an appeal if they haven't been tried. You gotta be found guilty first before you can appeal, but he's already appealed. Well, all of this stuff happened in Acts chapter 27, or 26, and then we find out that now Paul is headed on his trip to Rome. He's gonna be on his trip to Rome, and that's kind of where we're picking it up. And it says in Acts chapter 27, verse 1, I read from the New King James Version of the Bible, and it says this, and when it was decided that we should sail to Italy. What's in Italy? Rome. They delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. Okay, so just so you know, I know we know this stuff, but sometimes we don't connect the dots. Traveling via ship back then is nothing like traveling via ship right now. Today we have our itineraries, and we know what time the plane or the ship's going to leave, what time we're going to land. We know every little detail, but back then it wasn't like that. You didn't get to take a cruise ship and serve or be served at the poolside on the deck back then. I mean, you just jumped ship to ship to ship, kind of like modern day hitchhiking via ship. and you went on these cargo ships. We're going to find out that they're going to leave on this military ship and then jump onto a cargo ship, and it's going to end in this huge disaster that we're going to find out. But it didn't look like it did back then. Today, if we are traveling and there's a 15-minute delay on the runway, we're freaking out. Like, this sucks. And if it's an hour or 2 hours or overnight, we're freaking out. But back then, they would be delayed months, weeks, just sitting there, waiting for another boat to come, that they can hopefully get in the right direction. So now Paul, and just in the course of the book of Acts, he's traveled over 3,000 miles so far by sea. If you were to add up all of his missionary journeys and all the times that he's traveled just via ocean, just in the Mediterranean, it's about 3,000 miles. Over 30 years of ministry. So this is towards the end of 30 years here. He's at 3. So he's got a little bit of experience. He's not a salesman or a sailor. A salesman, get that? He's not a sailor. Yeah. But he's got some experience. He's been around the block a little bit. He knows what's going on. And so, though he's not a sailor, he's very familiar with how this system works and how to travel about. I mean, he went from Antioch of Syria, up north of Jerusalem. He went down to Cyprus via ship. He went over to Macedonia. He went to Ephesus. He went down to the island. We'll see today he's going to be on the island of Crete. He's gone to the island of Achaia. He's been in all of these different places, back and forth, through his 30 years of ministry. Now, the ships back then were not made of steel, obviously, like they are now. So if they're not made of steel, I want to put our thinking caps on. What are they made of?
Cement.
Cement! No, wood. They're made of wood. And the seas back then did the same thing they do now, which they got rough at times. And they got a little icy and a little windy and a little big old waves. And so we're going to find all this stuff that's going to happen today. The Mediterranean Sea back then and today gets very rough in the winter seasons. They have typhoons in those areas, which we'll find out it's going to happen in Paul's time. That happens today. Now, Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25, he said this. This is before his trip to Rome here. He says, 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and day I have been in the deep. Well, we're going to find out that Paul's going to have his 4th shipwreck on his trip to Rome. But he's been shipwrecked 3 times in those 30 years of ministry on his 3,000 miles going back and forth on the Mediterranean Sea. So he knows what this is like. He's been around the block. Okay? So we also know that Acts chapter 27 is going to end in disaster. For those of you who've read ahead. So Paul is going to board this ship from Caesarea, and he's going to board it with a bunch of prisoners. And if you read verse 1 carefully of Acts 27:1, you're going to find out that there's some people with him. Who do you think is with him according to Acts chapter 27:1? Let's pull this up here. It says, and when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So who's the we here? Luke. How do we know it's Luke?
Because Luke's writing this scroll.
Yes, Luke's writing the book of Acts. And so when he says they went, he's not there. When we went, that means he's there. So we know Luke is on this journey with him, okay? Now, it was very common in Paul's day to travel back and forth via ship. It was a lot faster than land. Like today we can drive. We can get there a lot faster. We wouldn't just walk across. But it'd be a lot faster to maybe go from Antioch of Syria to Macedonia, which is Europe, by ship rather than walking or by horse or by whatever other means that, chariot. It's not going to be as fast. And so ships were they were the shortcut. And so Luke is with him. Again, Paul's not a sailor, but Luke is with him here. And now I got some slides of the first ship that Paul is on. This is going to be a Roman ship. You're jumping ahead of me. So this is what it looks like. So they had a sail here and a sail here. This is the back of the ship. This is the front of the ship. I don't look that way. These things would steer the ship, and these are all the slaves. It'd be a row here, a row there, 3 rows of slaves that would be paddling in case there's a storm. I have another slide of what the ship that Paul is on in Caesarea. So if you look over here, you can see 3 rows of slaves inside the boat. And this is what it would look like on top. And they would have a little deck there and a deck there. And they would take this ship from Caesarea. They're going to go up to this place Sidon, then they're going to go to Myra, and then they're going to switch. So this is going to stay kind of in the Israeli area. I have another slide of what this ship would look like. So you have it with the sails up because there's no wind here. So you have all the rowing and then all of these people on top here. And then I have one more slide of this ship. Okay, so when they're in the storms, this is what it would look like. And I know these are drawings, so they have the 2. So this is the first ship. This is a Roman military ship. This would be the superpower of their time, coming in with their F-16s of their ships or their carriers, their big old giant, huge ships that are carrying everything. So these would be Roman soldiers. The captain would be up there. Captain's quarters would be right there. And this is kind of where they're staying, what he's traveling at this point. Okay, now, Luke is with him. We know a little bit about Luke in the book of Colossians. Now, we're going to be studying the book of Colossians coming up. But it's in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14 that we learn what Luke is. And it says in Colossians 4:14 here, it says, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. Now think about this. Wouldn't it be nice to have a doctor go with you when you're traveling, especially in those times? And so Luke is going to be with Paul as he's traveling as his doctor, and we're going to see that. It says in Acts 27, verse 2, so entering a ship of Adramyttium. So entering a ship of Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us. So now we know there's 2 people traveling with Paul, even though Paul's a prisoner. You have Luke and you have Aristarchus here, okay? So they're both with them. Now, he is from Macedonia, which is modern-day Europe. He's in that city called Thessalonica. Remember Paul wrote the book of Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, talking about the end times and how they're going through trials and these kind of things. So this guy's from the church there. He probably, honestly, came back with Paul when Paul was doing that on his 3rd missionary journey, was gathering the gifts from the different marginalized churches, the outside churches, and bringing that gift to the nation Israel. Aristarchus probably came with them as Luke. So they're probably there. They probably stayed while Paul was in prison, because we know that in Acts 25 and 26, when Paul was in Caesarea, it was Felix who let Paul have his friends come and go. Well, it's probably Luke and Aristarchus were probably one of his friends that were coming and going. So they're probably, and there's traveling partners. So we know that something about Aristarchus here. It says in Colossians chapter 4, verse 10 about Aristarchus, it says, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you. So Paul's traveling companion is going to be a fellow prisoner. Now, one of the theories, which is plausible, is that it's very possible that Luke and Aristarchus sold themselves into slavery to Paul, and therefore he was allowed to take them with him on their traveling journeys. And this would be common back then, because a lot of times you'd have a master and a slave, and the master would send that slave to school to be a doctor. And so Luke could have been, he's a Gentile. He's the only Gentile who's wrote a New Testament book, which is Luke and Acts. And so he's there, and he potentially could have sold himself into slavery with Paul to be a traveling companion, and same with Aristarchus, which would give him permission to travel on these boats with him. Very, very plausible. Either way, both of these men are going to risk their lives to accompany the Apostle Paul on his journey to Rome. Now, we saw in the book of Philippians, there was this guy named Epaphroditus. And we know that Epaphroditus risked his life for Paul. It says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 25 through 30, it says this. Paul says, yet I considered it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, and fellow soldier, but your messenger and the one who ministered to my need. And he's talking about Epaphroditus here. It since he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. For indeed, he was sick almost unto death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I say him more eagerly, that you may see him again, and may rejoice, and I may be less sorrowful. Receive him therefore in the Lord with all gladness, and hold such men in esteem, because for the work of Christ he came close to death, not regarding his life, to supply what was lacking in your service towards me. And so you see, Epaphroditus is a man who sacrificially gave his life in serving the Lord with Paul. Well, we know Luke and this other gentleman, Aristarchus, are also doing the same thing. They're risking their life. They're willing to put their lives in harm's way to serve the Lord alongside the Apostle Paul, even though Paul's a prisoner in chains on his way to Rome. So Paul had some pretty incredible people with him. It always takes a team to do the work of the ministry. It always takes a good, solid group of people that you can trust. And so they're committed to the Lord. They're committed to Paul. They board this ship. And as they do so, they're going to sail around this Asia Minor. Now I have another slide here. This is a map here. So down here is Jerusalem. He is in Caesarea. This is where he's on that Roman ship. They're going to go up to Sidon on that Roman ship. Then they're going to go all the way up to Myra on that Roman ship around Cyprus right there. And then from here, they're going to hop onto a cargo ship. And then they're going to go to Cnidus. Then they're going to go down to Fair Havens. It says Heavens, but it's Havens. And then from there, they're going to end up in Malta. And eventually to this place that looks like phlegm with an R. And then up to Italy. So right now they're right here, and they're going to go 1 day's travel to right there. This is kind of where we're at the story, and then we'll just pick it. All this is from here, from Caesarea to Sidon to Myra to Fairhaven, all the way to Malta is chapter 27. 28 will be from Malta up to Rome. That's where it's going to be, just so you know. So we're going to travel a whole area here. Okay? So that's a map of the Roman Empire of where Paul is traveling right now from Caesarea. He's headed to Rome in chains. He's not a free man. Now, when he was in Macedonia, which is right here, the Lord had spoken to him. This is Thessalonica. Right in this area, the Lord had spoken to him that he was actually going down to right about there, which is Corinth, in between Athens and Olympia right here. So there's Corinth right there. The Lord had spoken to him saying that he's going to, after he goes to Jerusalem, he's going to go to Rome. And Paul was thinking, sweet, I get to go to Rome and take the gospel on my way to Spain as a free man. Well, he's not going as a free man, but he's going. So the Lord will always fulfill his promises. The Lord never said, Paul, you're going to go on your own accord, but I'm going to get you there. And he's going to get a military escort on his way to Rome. And it's pretty powerful. Now, what I love about Paul, and this is important for us, church, is though Paul isn't on a missionary journey here in in Acts chapter 27, he's still on a missionary journey. He's still going to be missional. He's still going to talk about Jesus. He's still going to take a leadership role as a prisoner. He's still going to hear from the Lord, speak the word of the Lord, and he's going to do this while he's in chains. And we'll see this. Paul is going to be a missionary to those people who are on the ship with him. Okay? He's going to be a missionary when he comes into each port. We're going to see that in the city of Sidon, in the city of Myra. We're going to see that in Fairhaven. We're going to see that in Malta. Everywhere he goes, he's going to be a minister of the Lord, okay? And you got to understand something. He understood that God is in control, that God knows what he's doing. Even when it looks like other people are in control, like these Romans who are taking him to Rome, looks like that. Well, he's in chains. They're in control. Paul knows that the Lord is in absolute control of everything that's going on in his life. That God is he's fully engaged in all of it. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. Now, in Acts 28, Paul's going to be on the island of Malta. And he's going to be ministering there. And a revival is going to break out there that Paul's going to be heading up as a prisoner, which is pretty powerful. Lots and lots of people are going to come to the Lord. Okay? But if you look at from the outside in, looking at not from a biblical perspective or from a spiritual perspective, but from like a worldly view, it looks like Paul's just kind of like stuck. He just has to go with wherever the Romans are taking him. He has no voice, no choice. He just has to go. But no, that's not the case. God is in control. Now listen, God is in control of the Romans. He's in control of the weather. He's in control of the current that's happening. He's in control of the ship. All of these things are under the control of God. And therefore, God's going to fulfill his promises because God's in control. And Paul's going to go through some pretty rough stuff. Some pretty dark storms. Which I know that we've all been through. We've had some pretty dark seasons in our life. Where you can't even know which way's up. You don't know, God, where are you? I thought you were going to walk me through all this. Listen, God is in absolute full-on control. He's got this. Now, what I love about the Apostle Paul is he's a man who always looked for opportunity to speak God's word and to share the gospel, the all-inclusive gospel. He's always looking for a way to pour into people and to bring them to Christ, no matter where he's at. And we'll see this today. Every trial, every time he goes through persecution, every setback that Paul goes through, he understands that God is in control of this, and it's for a purpose. There's a reason why he's experiencing the things that he's experiencing right now, because God has a bigger plan. God is going to use the circumstance that he's in right now to position him to be around the right people at the right time so that he can bring those people into Christ. Same for us, church. God has put you through some of your darkest seasons to put you in a dark place, to reach those who are in those dark seasons and in those dark places, the ones who haven't come to the light yet. So he sends us through our circumstances into these dark, dark valleys. And in those valleys we run into people. And those people are the ones that God wants us to be the light of the world for. He wants us to share the hope that we have in Christ while we're in those dark seasons, in those dark places, in those dark valleys. And it's interesting because we walk with the Lord and we're on this mountain high and we're like, oh God, you're so good. And we start to just walk. And we go down this valley, we're like, well, this is kind of deep, but the light's out, it's nice. And then we turn on this road and it's just dark. I'm like, Lord, why would you lead me to this place? There's purpose. Because God is in control of all things. And no one else will go to the place that he's taking you. No one can. And he's designed you the way you are specifically so that you can reach those people in those dark places that you find yourself in. And that's what Paul's going to do here. We're going to see that. Okay? So when you're going through emotional, traumatic heartbreak, depression, anxiety, listen, God hasn't left you. He has you in that place for a reason. And it's to bring people out, and we'll see that. It reminds me of this man called Hudson Taylor. I have 4 of his books. He did a lot of journaling in the early 1800s. And he has a similar story that we're going to find here that happens with Paul, where Hudson Taylor's going to be on the ship as well. And he got called, okay, let me give you a little background of Hudson Taylor here. Okay, he felt called to the ministry when he was 19 years old. And he felt like he was called to go to China. And so he tried to go through different avenues, different ministries, different things, and the doors would be shut, the doors would be shut, the doors would be shut. So he ends up raising his own money and he ends up going to China. And on his way to China, he has to deal with the same kind of things that Paul's going to deal with in our story. Rough seas on a wooden boat that's not designed for rough seas. And so he's going to go through this trial. But here's a really cool thing about Hudson Taylor. Hudson Taylor was one of the greatest pioneer missionaries in modern time. So much so that most modern day missions, they take their ideas of what missions look like from Hudson Taylor. In fact, he started a work in China that's still there today, 100 years after he died. So he had some really fruitful work. He was one of the greatest missionaries that China ever saw, the greatest missionaries of our time apart from the Apostle Paul in our modern times. And in one of his books called Spiritual Secrets, and I have it, if you guys ever want it, I have it in a PDF. But he writes in his journals and he talks about how he's in this storm, very similar to what Paul's in. And he says the oceans there they were lifting up and dropping down. This is how bad the ocean tides were, okay? And everyone on this ship that Hudson Taylor was on, they had given up hope. They thought they were going to die. And so something that Hudson Taylor did, because he was freaking out, he thought he was going to die because he's human, he realizes one thing, that he's in the middle of a typhoon. Very similar to what we're going to see with Paul. But he's going to be spared. And not only is Hudson Taylor going to be spared from the storm, but everyone on the ship that's with him is going to be spared from the storm. And so he was talking with the captain, who happened to be a believer, and he's asking the captain, hey, are we going to make it through this thing? And the captain's like, I don't think so. He goes, well, what, can we use the lifeboats? He's like, no, I don't think we can. The storm's too big. He goes, how much time do we have? Do we have hours? Do we have days? He's like, we have less than a couple of hours. The ship's going to go down. Well, Hudson Taylor's a little panicked. He's a little upset about that. He's like, well, can we do this? Can we do that? And the captain's like, no, we can't do any of that stuff. There's no hope for us. And so Hudson Taylor did this thing. He kind of like wrote out his will, in a sense, of what he wanted with his possessions, what he wanted people to remember about his life, and he put it in this sealed container, with hope that put in that sealed container that someone at some point would find it and he'd be saved. And he said, as soon as he did that, he had the peace of God come upon him in a way that he's never experienced before, and his concern no longer became about himself. It became about those on the ship who didn't know Christ. And he wasn't afraid about that. He knew he was going to go. He had settled that. And so now he started to be missional and really focusing in and honing in on those on the ship, which we're going to see Paul's going to do the same thing. Okay? And I just want to be really clear. Like, it's very easy for me as a pastor to teach from the church, like, oh, you guys got the storm. It's going to be a breeze. It's nice to teach that on Sunday morning, but it's not so easy to go through on Monday morning when you're in the storm. So Sunday mornings, Wednesday nights are to equip us, to prepare us, that when we do face those storms, we have something in our cannon, something in our tool belt that we could draw upon, that we could stand on, that we could trust in and rely upon. It's there to equip us. Now, Sundays today is a time of preparation, because the storm's going to come, guys. You can't get out of it. So let's prepare our hearts. Now, Paul says, or it says in Acts chapter 27, verse 3 and 4, as we move on. So they left Caesarea, and it says, and the next day we landed in Sidon. And Julius treated Paul kindly, now Julius is the centurion, and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. When he had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. Okay, so I have another slide here. Well, it's really the same slide. So they're right here, and they're sailing up. Now, they want to go to Rome. They didn't just go straight up because the winds are blowing this way against them. And now remember, they don't have powered boats. They have sailboats. Everything's by sail. And so what they're going to do is they're going to go around this area, kind of go behind Cyprus, so that Cyprus can block the winds and they can kind of get up and around it. We're going to find that later on they're going to use the island of Crete here because the winds are going to change from this way, and they're going to go from the north east to the southwest. They're going to go this way. And so they're going to try and go underneath Crete to kind of block them from the wind. But right now they're staying close to here. They're in Sidon. That's the next day. They're going to go around here and all the way up to Myra. That's kind of what the plan is here. So they go to Sidon the next day. The winds are blowing against them. That's the route. Now, interesting, it says in Acts 27, verse 3 here, it says, and the next day we landed at Sidon. And Julius, the centurion, treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. So, part of studying the Bible is asking questions. So my question is, why would Paul need care? Why would they stop a day later, just, 40 miles up the coast? Was Paul sick? Did they stop in Sidon just to help Paul out? Now remember, I don't think Paul is sick here, by the way. I think he had favor from God. And what happened is, remember, how long has Paul been in prison in Caesarea?
2 years.
So he's been in prison for 2 years. So do you think he's going to be short on supplies like clothing for the trip? Personal care items for the trip? He's going to be, so they stop in Sidon, and he's got favor from the centurion. The centurion's going to let him kind of go free. He's not going to bail, because if he bails, everyone who accompanied him in bailing is going to be slaughtered by the centurion. So he allows him to go to his friends to receive care, which is probably personal care. Probably to get some items, some beef jerky, probably to get a jacket, some kind of like clothing, because it's going to be a long journey that he's going to be on. So he receives care from his friends who are going to give him the items that he needs for this trip. That's probably why they're there. Now, Sidon, sorry, it's not 30 miles, it's 67 miles north of Caesarea. And Paul will meet some of his friends there with Luke. I remember Aristarchus is with them. They're going to go meet his friends, get his supplies. And then it says in Acts 27, verses 5 and 6, it says this. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. Okay, so let's just go through the slide again. All right, so they're going from Caesarea to Sidon. They go around Cyprus, and now they're in Myra. And here what's going to happen is that Roman military vessel is going to sail back. They're going to be left there, and they're looking for a cargo ship. They're going to hitchhike from here to Rome. And so they look for a little cargo ship right here in Myra, and that's kind of where we're at in the story here. Now, they find an Alexandrian ship, and I want to kind of see this. Let's pull up the next slide. An Alexandrian ship, there in Myra, would come from Alexandria, which is down here, which is from Egypt. So this makes sense. It's an Alexandrian ship that has traveled straight up to Myra. So what happened, the cool thing about an Alexandrian ship is Egypt, you have the Nile River right here, and across this Nile River, this is where they would make, or this is where they produce the greatest crops of wheat, because it was just right off the river, it's perfect prime like landscape and territory for that. And so this was called, right here was called the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. And so the Alexandrian ships would take all of, because the Roman, remember, this is all Rome right here. They would take all of their wheat, and they would sell it there, and then they would go up to Rome, and they would supply Rome with the wheat from Egypt off the Nile. And so this Alexandrian ship is over here, and it's going to head over to Rome to give its cargo of wheat. So they find this ship that's going to Rome. It's an Alexandrian ship. Now, let me show you what an Alexandrian ship looks like. I have another slide here. This is a model of what it would look like. It's not as big as the military ship. It's about 140 feet long, 36 feet wide. This ship, again, it's just a model. This isn't actual size, because you can see it would be a lot bigger than this. But it's going to hold like almost 300 people on this ship that we're going to find out here. I have another slide here of it. So this is another close-up of it. They had this beam here in the middle, which was the big sail, and then they had a little sail here and then a little sail there. This pole is going to be key, because it's going to be, goes all the way to the bottom of the ship. And if that pole breaks off, you'll find out that it will destroy the ship. I think I have another slide of this. Yes. So this is where it looked like sail up here. Then there would be a little sail right there when this was not up, and this one, captain's quarters, and this is the kind of cargo ship. Now, it's going to hold tons of wheat right here, under here. Lots of grain and wheat. And they're going to travel on this ship here. Is that the last slide right there? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so this is the kind of ship that Paul's going to be on from Myra, and they're going to head from Myra to Rome. Well, they're going to try to get to Rome on this little ship here, okay? It hauls grain. That's what it's designed to do. So they're in Myra. Again, it's modern day hitchhiking, right? So they're ship hiking, and so they get to Myra, and the other ship, they leave the Roman ship, it goes back, and now they got to find a cargo ship that's going to head to Rome. And so, and what's cool is cargo ships, they would take people. It wasn't free ride. The Roman soldiers would pay the sailors, the owners, the headsmen, those different people to take them, so it's profitable for everybody around. Now it says in Acts chapter 27, verses 7 and 8, it says, when we had sailed slowly for many days, this is from Myra, and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the C is silent in this word, The wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmon, passing it with difficulty. We came to a place called Fair Haven, near the city of Lacia. So I have another slide here, just kind of show you where we're at. So again, they were up here, they went there, they're in Myra, switched ships. They sail because the wind is blowing this way. It's going from west to east. And so they struggled to get to Cnidus right here. And then they decided because the wind's blowing this way, west to east, they're going to go behind Crete to kind of block the wind. And they end up in Fairhaven. This is where they're at right here. That's where they're at. Okay? Now, it took them a long time to get to Crete. You know, this should have been a one-day trip, but it's taken them 3, 4, 5 days, whatever, to get there. Because the winds are blowing against them. Which tells me something here. So they're going to circle around Crete, and they're going to land right here in its haven, not haven, Fair Haven. I just did a typo on that slide. I apologize for that. Now, interesting. When Paul gets here, we don't know that there's a church on the island of Crete. And we don't know if Paul's going to be here long enough to start a church. But we do know that in the book of Titus, Paul tells Titus in Titus chapter 1, verse 5, he says this. He says, "For this reason I left you, Titus, in Crete, that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city as I commanded you." So we know that though we have no record of Paul starting churches on the island of Crete, there is a church later on, and he's going to send Titus as the pastor to anoint elders and deacons and leaders in all of the churches on the island of Crete. Which just makes me think, well, maybe he's sharing over there somehow. It's just a very interesting thing. Now, the book of Titus is written after Acts 27, after Paul is on this island of Crete here, okay? So if he started a church there, it's very interesting. Now, Acts 27 verse 8 says this. "Now when much time had been spent," there in Fairhaven, "and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them." Okay, question. What fast are they talking about? You're like, I don't know. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you. It's referring to the Feast of Atonement. So the Feast of Atonement would be done in like October, November, September, right around there. And so this is the fast that they're doing. And typically you wouldn't sail past November or September, October, right around there because of the weather. The weather's switching usually mid-October, and it would be dangerous to sail. And so it looks like what they're going to do is they're going to try and leave Fairhaven to go to another port city on the island of Crete and stay the winter there. That's going to be the plan. We're going to see that. Because Fairhaven, though it's a port, it's not really a port you want to stay the winter in. You want to have a bigger port with more opportunity to party, more opportunity for brothels for the soldiers, more opportunity to go to the clubs, right? You don't want to just go to a little hokey-pokey town. And so that's kind of where they're at. And we're going to see this. Okay? Now, let's see here. I have some slides here. Some more slides. So, they're going to be in, they left Cnidus, and then they're over here in Fairhaven. They actually want to go up to this area called Phoenix here. That's kind of where they want to go right here. Okay? But they're not. So what's going to happen is, and the reason they want to go down here is because of this area right here. This area is a problem. So if they were to sail from Cnidus and go this way, this is a problem. So I have another slide for this. Here's an actual picture of this. So this is Corinth, and this is called the Cape of Malea right here. And this is, can you go back to the previous slide? So this is this right here, okay? So we're seeing all of this, all of, okay, now go back to the other slide. This is what we're looking at. So this is a modern day view of this. So Corinth is right here. Athens would be over here somewhere. And they wouldn't go this way. This is the Cape Malea. This was called a graveyard of ships. And it was said that when people sailed around this area, Cape of Malea, that the soldiers would have to write out their wills because there were more shipwrecks right here because of all the stuff than in any other place. Now go back to the previous slide again. Sorry, I keep doing this. So they want to avoid this, going this path, because it's very dangerous. There's too many sunken ships here. So they're going to go this way, down here, plus the winds are blowing, west to east. So they're going to go down this way to kind of bypass Achaia to head over to Rome. That's kind of what they're doing here, okay? So those three horns, the Cape of Malea, most dangerous place to sail in the Mediterranean Sea. A graveyard of sailors is what they called it. Okay, go back to the other slide. Thank you. Okay, now this is where. Now let's go to. We'll add one more slide here. Let's go to this slide. Okay, so they're from here. They don't want to go here because that's a graveyard of ships. But down here in Sardis Major, that's another problem because that is a huge area with major reefs. And so this is another area here where they were doing some kind of like sonar searches in the early 21st centuries, and there's another graveyard of ships right over here because of all the reefs. And so they want to avoid this too. So both of these areas are problematic for, especially for a wooden boat of that time. Okay, so now here's the problem. They don't have motorized ships. So the wind is blowing west to east, and so they're going to try and go underneath Crete to stop the wind so they can get over to, really they want to go from here to Phoenix and then up this way. They want to kind of go that way, but they're not going to end up there. They're going to be blown off course, which we'll see here. And so, though Paul's not a sailor, remember, he's done 3,000 miles worth of sailing, been in 3 shipwrecks at this point. He's got a little bit of experience. Though he's not an expert, he kind of knows, okay, the weather's bad, things aren't looking good, this isn't a good time to sail. I've been in the 3 shipwrecks already because people thought they were overachievers, you know, and so he's going to give some advice here. Now watch this. So Paul says, hey, he has a conversation, he says in Acts 27 verse 10, he says, men, I perceive. And I want you to notice he perceives. It's not a word of the Lord. Just be clear. I perceive, based on my experience, that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss. Not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. Verse 11. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman, and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Now, of course, the centurion is going to be persuaded by the helmsman. The helmsman is like the captain of the ship and the owner of the ship more than the prisoner on the ship. So the centurion's going to do what we all would do. Well, you know, the owner of the ship and the captain says, we can do this, we got this. You know, of course, they're getting paid too by the Romans to transport. And so Paul's like, no, it's going to end in disaster. And the centurion's like, though, Paul, you have a voice, I'm going to listen to the experts this time. Okay? Now we saw in Acts 27 verse 3. We already saw this. And Julius, this is the centurion, treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty. And what I find interesting here is that though Paul is a prisoner, he has a voice. He has the ear of the centurion, that he's won the centurion. The centurion has, you know, and we're going to find out later on that Paul's going to command the whole ship and the military. We're going to see this later on. Okay, now, I don't know how he met the centurion. I don't know if it was for the 2 years that he was in Caesarea, that the centurion was maybe the captain of the guard there, and he had time to dialogue with Paul. That could be it. He could have just met him on the voyage, and the fact that Paul was a Roman citizen could have gave him favor. We don't know. We just know that Paul has favor from the centurion, and God's going to use the centurion to spare Paul's life later, and God's going to use Paul to spare the centurion's life. And it's pretty radical, this full circle that we're going to see here. Okay, but here's something about centurions. Centurions are full-on pagan in their belief style, right? In their worldview. They're very promiscuous. They're military men. They're sailors. And think about modern-day military sailors, right? They go to ports, and what do? They party. They look for the local brothel, and they do these. And this is who the centurion would be. And yet Paul, a spiritual Jew, a believer, a leader in the movement of Christianity at that time, still is willing to befriend those who are not in that religion that he's in, or in the faith that he's in, or in the lifestyle that he's in. He still is going to befriend those in other lifestyles, in other worldviews, other beliefs, other religious beliefs. And I think that's a lesson for us as a church that we've missed today. Where we draw a line in the sand and say, no, you have to be like us or we won't associate. That's wrong. The centurion would be in the category of maybe like a law enforcement, or like the military police. The guys that people don't really like, And Paul's going to befriend this guy. A centurion and a spiritual Jew were polar opposites. Remember, the Jews believed that the Gentiles, and especially Rome, the oppressor, they were the fuel to the fire of hell, that God created them specifically to be the fodder, which is that little bird's nest that lights up, that starts the fire of hell. That's what the Gentiles, the marginalized, were created for. And so Paul is associating with the complete opposite spectrum of what a Jew would associate with. And this is going to be a problem later on, but he's associating with a military commander. It'd be like in the middle of the Black Lives Movement, right? And you're like, racism sucks. We hate the oppressor. And then you going up in there and befriending the chief of police who your people are rioting against. That's what Paul's doing. He's going to the oppressor and he's befriending them. Now, he did this before. Paul was always making friends with those in power, those in leadership. We saw this in the city of Ephesus. Remember when there was a riot in Ephesus that we looked at? It says in Acts chapter 19, when Paul's in Ephesus, verse 30-31, it says this, and when Paul wanted to go into the people, they're rioting, they're in this big giant arena, 30,000 people, and they're rioting. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, and we're going to know it's going to be the city clerk, which is a lot like the governor of that time, like a mayor of that time, who were Paul's friends, sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theater. Okay? So Paul has this ability to talk with those who are in power, and he has this ability to make friends with those in key positions. And he has a way to talk to the Jews, to Roman officials, to the laymen, to the pagan. He's really good at this stuff, and I think it's a good lesson for us to open up our circle a little bit and not to be so isolated and in our own little worlds here. Because he has this power. Now, even though Paul doesn't have a platform, he's not at the podium or the mic, the centurion will hear him later on. And though the centurion doesn't listen to him now, God has prepped up the no to be a yes later. The centurion doesn't want to stay in Fairhaven because it's not a good city to port in. And it says in Acts 27, verse 12, I just want to prove this. And because the harbor, this is Fairhaven, was not suitable to winter in, they didn't want to spend 3 months there. It's boring. They don't have brothels. They don't have, parties. They don't have the nightclubs. The majority advised to set sail from there also, if by any means they should reach Phoenix, which is on the island of Crete, a harbor of Crete opening towards the south and northwest, and winter there. So now we see the plan of why they left Fairhaven. They didn't leave Fairhaven just to leave Fairhaven. It was a bad time to sail, but they wanted to go a little bit further north off the coast just to get to a better harbor. One, the harbor is facing the opposite ways of the wind, so it would protect the ship from the wind for the winter. And two, it's a bigger port, bigger city, more people, more things to do, especially if you're going to be stuck in the winter somewhere. Okay? And again, they didn't have the itineraries that we have now. We think today, like if we have a layover somewhere in the Midwest, we're expecting the airport to shuttle us to a hotel and to accommodate. Well, we should have accommodations. And that's what they're looking for. They're going to be stuck on this island, so they're looking for accommodations. And so it's really a preference. So they're going to go up to Phoenix, the little city, the port city, so that they would have a better place, better accommodations is what they're looking for. That's their plan. Okay? So that's what's happening in our passage. They're at Fairhavens, not really a good city, not a good port, it doesn't have proper accommodations. Okay? Now, that's what they're concerned about. Remember, these are not spiritual people. They're like, I want to be able to spend 4 months or 3 months not wanting to shoot my brains out because I'm bored, but I want to be able to enjoy myself while I'm in this downtime waiting for the weather to turn so that we can take these people to Rome. Now, Phoenix is a much bigger city, a much larger city. And so they get on the ship. because the captain and the owner say it's fine, though Paul says it's not. They get on the ship and they're going to sail north, okay? The winds are blowing against them. And here's the thing, if the winds on a cargo ship like that blow too hard, it's going to destroy the ship. Okay, you got to have the right kind of wind. Now it says in Acts 27 verse 14 through 20. So they set sail, they leave Fairhaven, and it says, but not long after a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Claudia, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the citrus sands, they struck sail and so were driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, we're going to find out later, it's 14 days, they won't see the sun, stars, anything. All hope that we would be, verse 20. Now when neither the sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, which means a major storm, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. Okay, so I have 3 slides here. I want to pull up the next slide. Okay, so here's Fairhaven, that little dot. They want to sail north. This is the island of Crete. And they want to go up to Phoenix, which is a better city. There's a little island called Claudia, one of those names, which would kind of be like, you guys ever been to LA? And you have like Catalina Island off of like, okay, so this would be like Catalina Island. It's about the same size, right around there. And it's about the same distance. So it's about 30 miles off the coast from Fairhavens to Claudia right there. It's about 40 miles right around there. Okay, so I have another slide here. I just want to kind of give you a better picture of what it looks like. So this is the island of Crete. Now Crete is 160 miles long, about 35 miles wide. That's probably a little longer. And there's the island of Claudia. So there's Fairhaven right there. They want to go to Phoenix here, but they're going to kind of go out here, and they're going to be kind of right in this general area when this tempest hits. Now, the reason they didn't just sail right next to the coast is because they're in a wooden boat, and there's a lot of reefs and a lot of shallow sand, so they have to go out and then around that way. That's kind of what they were going to do. But as they leave this area, the winds change. The winds were blowing west to east, and now they're going to go from the northeast to the southwest. And we're going to find out that they're actually going to be spinning like this. And what happens when the winds spin like this? What's that usually called? Typhoon. It's going to be a typhoon. They're going to get caught in a typhoon. Interesting. The word Euroclydon, if you translate that, now the transliteration, so the translation is what the word says. The transliteration is how the word sounds. When you transliterate it, it means northeastern winds. So when they say Euroclydon, they're talking about these northeastern winds. They're blowing from the northeast down to the southwest. So it's doing this circle here, okay? And interesting, the word for tempest is our English word typhoon. That's where we get the word typhoon from. So they're going to be caught in this huge typhoon here, which means that the wind's hitting them from all directions. They don't know which way to put the sail up because it's just blowing in a circle. And that's a problem. And how do they navigate back in those days? Because they don't have sonar or radar. So what would they use? The sun and the stars. The problem is they can't see the sun and stars for 14 days. They have no idea where they're at. The wind's blowing in every direction. They have no idea where they're at. It's pretty, pretty powerful. Now, Luke's going to give us a lot of details here. Okay? So those who know a lot about ships, which is Julia in the back, he talks about how they take their sails down. Now, why would he take their sails down and just let the ship just kind of go? Again, they had that big center beam, right? In the middle, it's a giant mast. It's like a telephone pole, and if the sail ripped off, it would rip that whole thing off, and it would split the ship in half, so they would sink. So they have to put the sail down. Otherwise, they're going to be destroyed in a typhoon. They can't have the sails up, and so they're going to let the ship just kind of do what it does. The currents and the winds are just going to carry it where it carries it. It's going to be like a cork, and going down the stream. It's like it's just going to go where it goes. Okay, so they're in a typhoon. Now here's a dilemma. There are 276 people on this ship. 276, okay? It's a heavy ship. It's filled with tons of grain that's going to Rome. So it's a big problem because it's not that big of a ship. It's like 130 feet, 140 feet. So this is the problem. So now this is the wind. It's no longer going this way. It's going that way. So they wanted to go up this way. That's kind of where they wanted to go. But the winds blew them out over here. They found themselves over here. And this is where they're going to get their skiff, their little lifeboat. They're going to try and secure it onto the ship. And then they're going to be driven that way some more. They're just going to go down, and they're at the mercy of the wind. Now remember, God always comes through with His promises. So it's going to be pretty tricky here. Now, I remember when I was younger, we were in LA. It was me, my mom, I think it was my brother, I don't remember, and I think it was her boyfriend at the time. And we were going to go to Catalina Island. We were going to go fishing off of Catalina. We took a night trip. And my mom decided, because she gets seasick, to take a seasick pill. And me, being the godly teenager that I was, I mocked her. I mocked her so bad. I was like, oh, you got to take a seasick pill. You're so lame, right? So it was a night trip. I think we left at like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. And we go to start sailing through Catalina. We're doing good. We're about an hour in. So if you take a fast boat, it's like a 2-hour or 3-hour trip to Catalina. But the slow boats, it's like all night. So about an hour in, they decided to serve dinner. And we eat dinner, and then about a half after that, I start to feel a little nauseous. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is bad. This is not good. And next thing you know, I find myself over the edge of the boat, just vomiting my brains out. And because of the up and down, my vertigo, whatever it was, I just could not get bearings. And I was so sick, I couldn't even take the seasick pill that I mocked my mom for taking. She sat there laughing at me the whole time. I'm like, I hate you. And so I'm doing this whole seasick thing, and this is what we're going to find the sailors are going to be dealing with here. I will never mock my mom again about that. I have other things to mock her on. But here's the thing. When I was going to Catalina, it wasn't a typhoon. It was just normal waters. They're in a typhoon, which means the waters are going to be huge up and down. It's a big deal, okay? And they're going to be tossed to and fro for 14 days. So they're going to be not feeling good. They're going to be getting seasick. It's just a part of it. Paul's going to experience it with them. He's not going to be excluded from this. Okay? They have no idea where they're at because they can't see the stars, the sun, the moon, nothing. They're just kind of for 14 days. Can you imagine? Put yourself in that situation. On a wooden boat. That would be scary. Now, I think that was a slide. Is there another slide before the Acts 27:16 and 17? Or is this it?
Next one is 27:20.
27:20? Did I get it? Okay. Alright, that's where. Alright, so it says in Acts 27:20. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, they're in a typhoon, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. So we're going to learn that they didn't eat, probably because of their seasickness. They're not going to eat for 2 weeks. We're going to see all that in the story. Okay, they're in a typhoon. Now, I have another slide here. Okay. So again, they left Fairhavens, and they wanted to go up to Phoenix. Claudia is right here, and they're going to find themselves going out down here. They're going to find their bearing right about here. We're going to see that in a minute. Okay? So, but right now, they're right about here in our story. In Acts chapter 27, verse 16 and 17, they're going to be off that island that's right there that we just saw. And it says, and running under the shelter of an island called Claudia, that's that little Catalina island that we talked about, we secured the skiff with difficulty, which tells me the waters are doing this. because they're trying to get that skiff, that lifeboat into the boat, and they're struggling with it. And these are seasoned sailors. When we had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship. And I want you to think about this. They're going to put cables all the way around the ship to hold the ship together. And fearing lest we should run aground in the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. Okay, I have another slide here, because I want us to see this. This is the next slide. So they left there, they go past, and next thing they know, they're over here in the Syrtis sands. This is where the big ship are. They're over here. Now the winds are blowing north to south, this way. And so they think they're going to, they see that they're here, and so they're going to put their sails up, and it's going to push them up north. It's going to push them really up to Malta. But all this area here is a big section of ocean with no land in sight, no sun, no moons, no stars, okay? Now, so they're in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea somewhere, right here, somewhere. And that little arrow is just kind of like, we're taking a good guess, but they're just kind of tossed to and fro all over the middle of that ocean there, okay? Now, Malta, right here, is 590 miles straight shot to Fair Havens. Okay, 590 miles right there. It's like 1,200 miles if you drive that way. And I did that with the Google World Map, and I kept trying to give me the driving route. I was like, oh, I hate this thing. So I had to find another website that would give me the distance. I was able to mark it. So it's about 600 miles from Malta to there. Now, I don't know if you guys know how far 600 miles is, but if you're 300 miles away, you're not going to see anything. You're not going to see land, nothing. And that's kind of where they're at. Okay? Now, what's interesting is this idea of God is going to save his people. And when God saves his people, what I love about this, he doesn't just save his people. He's going to save those who are around his people. Everybody on the ship is going to be saved because of his people. And this is cool. This is really powerful. We're going to see that, okay? And when I think about the Lord saving his people, and I think about the supernatural, though I believe full on in the supernatural, I believe that God created the natural, and therefore he does the supernatural a lot of times in the natural. And he's going to use regular circumstances where people say, oh, that's just a coincidence. And we're like, no, that was God. God used the natural to do the supernatural. We're going to see that here. Okay? Now, when I think about the miracles of the Lord, when I think about God speaking to people, I've never asked, I'm always like, Lord, speak to me. And all throughout the Word, we'll see he'll send ministering angels to minister and speak. And we're going to see that happen today on this ship. It's pretty powerful. Okay? But here's the thing that we have to be aware of when we're talking about the natural, supernatural miracles and things like that. We are never, ever to seek the miracle. And what do you mean? I don't mean we don't look for miracles. But we don't put our faith in miracles. We put our faith in the Lord. And we ask the Lord to do what the Lord does. Because once we put our eyes on the miracle, and our eyes are not on the Lord, we're not going to see the miracle. And so we've got to be really, really careful that we're not looking for the miracle. Okay? Our faith should never be in the miracle or the situation. It must always be in the Lord himself. Always. And far too often we're looking we're in a crisis and we're looking at the struggle there and like, God, I need you to do this. Like we have better counsel than God. Our finite minds are going to tell the infinite God how to do something. It doesn't work that way. And I'm sure that in this tempest, when Paul's floating around this ocean right here, I can guarantee you there were times where he was scared. I can guarantee it. I can guarantee you he felt seasickness, especially when you're there and it just drops and your stomach is still up there, but you're down here and they're going back and forth and they're tying the ship with cables to hold it together. I'm pretty sure the guy was scared, like you and I would be. And this is what I love. I love the fact that when we're in our weakest, darkest season, when we are literally scared to death, that is usually when God will come through. We don't need him, sadly, when we're not in those times. Because when we're not in those dark seasons, it's like, God, I got this. I can do this myself. But the moment things are out of our control and the storm's too big and we're seasick and we're being tossed back and forth and we can't see the sun, we can't see the moon, we can't see, at that point when we don't know where we're at, I don't even know which way's up. That's when we'll tend to cry out to the Lord and we want to look for Him. Okay? So again, I'm confident Paul has it in, he's sick, he's not feeling good, he's scared, and I think about how scared he was, and then I think about him experiencing the same thing the sailors are experiencing. And then I think about, well, who else would experience what people experience? And I think about suffering and pain. And then I think Jesus himself suffered. He experienced the same things that we experience. God suffered. He knows what it feels like. He gets it. Think about all the stuff that happened when he went to the cross. Betrayed by his closest friends. Given into the hands of the Jewish religious system that he preached against. They put him in the hands of the Gentiles that he's trying to reach. They scourge him. They mock him. They whip him. They put a crown of thorns on him. They crucify him. They stab him in the side. He gets it. Jesus wasn't exempt from trials and tribulations. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44 and 45, Jesus says this, "But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those," listen to this, "who spitefully use you and persecute you. That you may be sons of your Father in heaven," meaning that you can go through the same things that he's gone through. "For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust." And here's our problem when we're in the trial. And I'm going to speak to all of us because I know all of us. I know how we think because you're like me. Far too often we're praying, "God, get me out of this trial. Get me out of it." And when God doesn't get us out of the trial, we think He's forsaken us. Right? Am I the only ungodly one here? Okay, those online, I'm the only ungodly one here. Everyone else has never experienced this. Am I the only one that's experienced this? This is where we use our words.
No.
Instead of praying, and this is key, "God, get me out of the trial," we've got to change our language. "God, get me through the trial. Get me through it," because we're going to go through it. We can't reach those in the outer places if we're not in the outer places. So if we're in the outer places, we've got to be able to get through that, not out of it. Because once you take it out of it, you can't reach those people anymore. Such a small window of opportunity for us. Really, really, really important. Lord, get me through this, not get me out of this. Because when you pray, "Lord, get me out of this," and He doesn't, then what happens is you start to accuse God of not caring about you. He's forsaken you. No, He hasn't. He's got you there to do a work. And that's what He's there for. Which means that your faith in Him has to be, hear me, relationship-based. It has to be. You can't do it through rituals and religion and rules, and it's got to be relationship-based. If you don't have a solid relationship with the Lord, then when you go through those dark places, when you come out on the other side, you're not going to be better. You're going to be bitter. So relationship's key. Walking with the Lord is key, otherwise you're going to become bitter. And rather than being a people who say, God, I can't believe you abandoned me, it's more like, "God, please get me through this. Lord, you're the one that can get you. You control the storm. Help me to walk with you in the midst of this. Help me to be a light in the midst of this dark place that I'm in." So we need to start walking with Him, church. We need to come to the place that, "Lord, without you, I'm hopeless." Why would I abandon the Lord in my darkest season? He's the only one who can get me out of it. He's the only one that can control it. So why would I abandon Him thinking, "Well, no, I'm done. I quit. The trial's too hard." Listen, when you walk away from God, the trial doesn't stop. Your source of hope stops. We've got to walk with Him in the midst of it. We've got to trust God in it. When you don't know what to believe anymore, fall back on what you do know. This is why journaling is so important, church. Because you can go back and read how God got you through bad times in the past, and you can be reminded of that when you're in a dark season in the future. Really, really important. So we need to trust the Lord. We need to walk with the Lord. Now, Hudson Taylor shares about another storm that he was in, and it's very interesting. Okay? And he'd asked the captain again, how much time do we have before we go down? And the captain's like, we don't have much time. I just want you to know that. He'd been on multiple ships that were in a problem. And so he writes this down in his journals. And he says, when he had lost all hope, this is what he did. There was the captain and 2 other people on the ship. Okay? And there was a whole ship, but there was the captain, 2 other people in Hudson that were believers on the ship. So 4 people that were believers. And this is what happened. Hudson Taylor was teaching a sermon, and he's young, and he's doing a Sunday message. And what happened was, he's sharing, he's on the deck, he's got everybody there, they're all doing the Sunday message, and he sees the captain with this concerned look on his face, and the captain keeps looking over and going back. And so Hudson Taylor finishes his message, and then walks over to the captain and is like, what's going on? But they weren't in a storm this time, there was no wind. They were just stuck, there was no wind in their sails. So without the wind blowing, they're screwed because they're based on current only. They're just kind of floating there. And so the captain says, we're caught in a current. And this current is going to take us to this island. And we're going to crash on the reefs. And unless there's wind, we don't know. We're going to be perishing. So after they exhausted all resources, they're trying to row the boat, but it's too big of a current. They can't do that. They're doing all these different things. When they're at the end of themselves, Hudson Taylor says, hey, captain, and 2 other believers, why don't we go down into our cabins and let's seek the Lord for a couple of hours and let's pray. And so they do that. They all go down because there's nothing else they can do. They've exhausted everything. They go down and they start to pray. And Hudson Taylor says, as soon as he started to pray, he barely started to pray, and God gave him a peace, again, that he was going to bring a wind, that the Lord spoke to him. So he goes up, and he goes up to the one of the seamen, and he says, hey, put up the sails. And remember, Hudson Taylor's probably 19, 20 years old this time, so he's a little kid compared to these seasoned sailors. And the sailor says, I'm not putting up the sail. There's no wind. And Hudson said, listen, my God said there's going to be a wind. Put up the sails. He's like, there's no wind. Everyone's like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. There's no wind. I'm not putting up the sail. Everybody's going to look at me like thinking I'm an idiot because you don't put the wind up or the sails up until the wind comes. Well, this little flurry started to blow. And Hudson says, hey, look, there's a flurry. And he goes, no, that's just a flurry. You're an idiot. And then so Hudson Taylor put his feet in the ground. He's like, listen, put the sails up. God is going to bring a wind, but if the sails are not up, you're going to miss it. And his persistence, he was persistent with the sailor, and the sailor's like, fine, whatever. Everybody, Hudson wants the sails. I'm tired of listening to the guy, I'm going to put it up. And as he puts it up, it's not enough. It's just going up. The wind blows them, and a big wind, and gets them out of the tide. I'm just like, wow, God, you're always there. The reason I believe that God did that for Hudson, because Hudson Taylor was on a missionary journey. He's there to bring the gospel to people. And the fact that God had promised Hudson that he's going to get to China, and he's on the ship, means that he's going to take everybody with him. And so the fact that he saved Hudson. He heard Hudson's prayer. Yet he saved all the people around them in response to that. It says in Acts 27:21, this is where we're at. This is what's going on in our story with Paul. It says, but after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, men, you should have listened to me and have not sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. I love this because Paul calls them out for not listening to him. We have a saying in my house. We're going to call him Dr. Paul, right? They say, Dr. Amy, because I'll say something like, you got to do this. And I'm like, no. There's a lot of fighting, and then, or bickering, and no. And then they come to their senses, and they listen to Dr. Amy.
Dr. Scott.
Dr. Scott. I get my I told you so from the word, just so you know, right here. Paul did, just so you know. It's biblical. It's not biblical.
No.
But I love it because Paul would say, listen, I told you so. He doesn't dwell there. You should have listened to me. Now listen to me now. And he's going to give them some really powerful advice. He calls them out for not heeding the warning that he gave in Acts 27, verse 10, where he said, "Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also of our lives." Now, if you look at this verse closely, and I think it's important, verse 10 is not a prophetic word. It's not a prophetic word, okay? Remember, Paul says, "I perceive." And though it's not a prophetic word, half of it's going to come to pass, and half of it's not. And we're going to see this, okay? I believe that Paul is just talking from his experience. Man, I've sailed in the winters 3 times we've done this, and all 3 times the ship's sunk. So, he's given a word from his experience, and he might have what we call a sense from the Lord. We've all had that where the Lord we're sensing the Lord saying something, but he hasn't said something, so we're speaking to it because we should, but we're speaking in faith, and we don't always say necessarily the right thing. And I think this is what's happening there. He's giving his a sense from the Lord that we're going to perish, but then he's taking it to its logical conclusion, saying we're all going to die. But the Lord never said that, and I just want to pull that out. Okay? Now, he says in Acts 27, verse 21 through 23, after he says, "I told you should have listened to me," he says, "But after a long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, 'Men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night,'" and I love this, "'an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve.'" I love this so much because Paul has been in the storm for 14 days. He's been going through literal hell for 14 days. When everyone's lost hope, he's like, they're at the end. There's no hope. And then the angel of the Lord comes in the midst of the storm. Doesn't remove Paul from the storm. Comes to him in the midst of it. They haven't eaten. They've lost all hope. They're ready to die. Okay? And what is Paul doing? This is important for us, church, when you're in the storm. Paul is still seeking the Lord. He's still seeking the Lord. That's what this says. Okay? And as Paul is still seeking the Lord reveals himself to Paul. And think about it. Paul's feeling seasick. He hasn't eaten. He's hungry. He's scared. There's a lot going on. He's around sailors who have the sweetest language on the planet. They're all. He's in this. He's in chains. He's a prisoner, and he's still seeking the Lord amidst the storm. Really, really good word for us. Okay, he's in a typhoon. Now, what I love, what we're going to find here is that though Paul is a prisoner, he's going to go from prisoner to commanding the ship. He's going to command the ship, and he's going to command the Roman military. It's pretty powerful. Watch this. Okay? He says in Acts 27, verse 23, "For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and to whom I serve." This gives me some questions I want to ask, okay? Do you see yourself that way? Do you see yourself as belonging to God? Or is it the other way around? That God is your genie and he belongs to you? Sadly, in our culture, we have a genie in a bottle. But think about this for a second. Far too often we think we're the master and that God is our genie. God is to do our bidding. Okay? We act like he owes us something. And if God owes me, that means he's responsible. He has to get me out of the trial because he owes me. Well, I got a news flash for you. God owes you nothing. Okay? If you want to talk about being in debt, guess who owes who? What are the wages of sin? Or what are the wages of sin is what? Death, right? So wages are something that we've worked for and therefore is owed to us. And if God were to pay us our wages, The result of that would be death. But instead of giving us wages, what's he give us?
Life.
Gift. Gives us a gift. Listen, God paid a debt that he didn't owe because we owed a debt we couldn't pay. Think about that. It says he purchased us with his own blood. So if he purchased you, what's that mean? He owns you, right? If I buy something, it's mine. It doesn't own me, I own it. God is my master. He can do whatever he wants and whatever he pleases with my life. And I think if we switched our worldview on this, it would help us as we're going through the trials. Because it's far too often, again, God, get me out of this. I'm commanding the Lord. Instead of, Lord, you're God. My life is yours. Do what you want. And it frees us up. It frees us up. How do you come out of the trial? Do you come out of the trial bitter or better? That worldview is going to determine that. Listen, if God is your genie, you're going to come out bitter. If he's your master, you're going to come out better. How do I know? Because the Bible says so, right? Where does it say it? Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 5 says this. Watch, this is pretty cool. Because you can come out better. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulations produce something. What do tribulations produce? Perseverance. And perseverance produces character. And character produces, now what didn't they have on that ship? They had lost all hope. So, perseverance, character produces hope. Now, hope does not disappoint because the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. You can come out better. James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4 says this, my brethren, believer, Christian, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces something. What does it produce? Patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. You can come out of it better. Now, the word perfect here is the Greek word is mature, complete, whole. That you can come out a mature person, seasoned. We say, wow, that thing's got character. It's been seasoned. Well, that can be you. You can come out better, or you can come out bitter. And the key is, if he's your master, you're going to be bitter. But if you lay your lives and surrender to the master, you're going to come out better. So we go on in Acts 27, verse 23. And it says, for there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve. Because he belonged to the Lord, and he knew he belonged to the Lord, and the Lord didn't belong to him. The result of that is he served the Lord instead of the Lord serving him. It's an issue of master and servant. He's the master. We're the servants. Okay? You gotta realize that you belong to the Lord. He doesn't belong to you. He's the one in charge. There's no greater place on this side of eternity than to be in service to the Lord. We've talked about this in our Romans study, right? About being a weapon in the hands of God. I mean, you want to talk about life? If God is fighting a battle and you're the weapon that he's using, dude, that's exciting. But it comes through service. You've got to serve. You've got to be willing to lay down your life so you can pick it up and use it. No greater place to be. He says in Acts 27, 23 and 24, for there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and to whom I serve. And this is what the angel of God said. Do not be afraid. So, why would an angel of God tell Paul not to be afraid? Because he's afraid. I wouldn't say, please sit down right there, when you're already sitting down right there. It doesn't make sense. Please put your masks on. Oh, you wouldn't say that. So, do not be afraid, meaning that Paul's afraid. He says, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. And he says, he doesn't say, do not be afraid, shit. He says, Paul, you. Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. What is the name of our Bible study today? God always fulfills his promises. God told him back in Acts chapter 23, he told him back in Acts chapter 22, Acts 21, that he was going to go to Rome. So if he would have just remembered, listen, God said you're going to go to Rome. He got arrested in Jerusalem and God covered him in the night and says, listen, you got to testify in Rome. If he would have just believed God's word, he wouldn't be afraid. He's like, well, I got to get to Rome. I'm going to get to Rome. God said I'm going to go to Rome. God always fulfills his promises. Paul could have said in the storm, and he may have said in the storm, this isn't working. How am I going to get there? The storm's too big. I'm going to die. We've been tossed to and fro for 14 days. The creaking that was happening in that ship. Oh, the horror. The cracks. I'm sure they had to bail water at some point. Well, God said he was going to get to Rome. God still says he's going to get to Rome. God has made some promises to you, church. Don't ever doubt that God won't fulfill his promises. It took God 20 years before I became a pastor. 20 years. And in that 20 years, I was kicked out of the church multiple times because of where I land on the all-inclusive gospel. And here we are. Still a church. We're a church. God has made promises to you guys. He will be faithful to bring those things to pass. And we're going to find the key to how in a second here. We're going to find the key to how. Now, Acts 27:25. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe that God will be just. I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. Paul says, I believe God. So the obvious question is, do you believe God? Okay, so if you're nodding your head yes, then let me ask this. If you believe God, then why do you argue with the Lord? When God speaks, why do you argue with him? You're like, oh yeah, God speaks, but that's not for me. That's for someone else. Why do we say that? Listen, God said it. I believe it. That settles it. Do you know who said that? Corrie ten Boom. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. That's what Paul is doing here. God gave me a word. He said he's going to get me to Rome. I'm going to get to Rome. I'm not going to die. He says in verse 26, however, we must run aground on a certain island. So now the Lord's going to give Paul some directions in the midst of the storm. Probably something he doesn't like. You know, I'm not a fourth shipwreck. But he's giving him some directions. Now there's two things I want us to see here, okay? I want you to see the sovereignty of God on one hand and the practicality of man on the other, and how there's a tension between the two. That God is sovereign, but it's still based on people obeying the Lord. So God will come through with he'll have a promise. Hey, all of you guys are going to be safe. It's a promise from God. If you stay on the ship. You got to stay on the boat. If you bail, that promise is null and void. But God is sovereign. He will get you through. But it's based on the if. And we're going to see this. God said it would happen, but in order for it to come to pass, you have to do your part. Watch this. Acts 27, and this isn't a works gospel. This is a sovereignty of God conversation. Okay? 26 and 27. However, we must run aground on a certain island. Now, when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. So remember, they spent 14 days without the sun, moon, or stars. They're being tossed back to and fro, just up and down in the ocean, okay? In a typhoon. But they sense something, that land's approaching. It says in verse 28, and they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little bit further, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Now, let me ask a question. Don't answer, Julia. What is a fathom?
Assuming it's the depth of the ocean.
It's a unit of measurement. 20 fathoms is 120 feet. 15 fathoms is 90 feet. Okay, now I have some slides. Here's a slide I want to show you. Now, obviously this isn't Bible times because there's cannons on this thing, so this is post. But this guy right here is going to measure via the unit of fathom the depth of the ocean using this rope, which we're going to see. So I have another slide here to give you a better look at this. Okay, again, modern day, because they didn't have, things like that. But this is what a fathom would be. It'd be a rope, and then be these knots with ribbons on, and this would be a weight right here. I have one more slide here, so to kind of show you what it is. Now, 2 fathoms, so this is what they do. They have the rope, the weight there, and then they have these measurements so they can count to see where they're at. They don't have, because think about it. If you've got 20 fathoms, you don't know, you might have lost count. 1, 2, 3. So they have these different leather things on there to kind of tell you where they're at. So when all you could see in the water was that one, you knew it was 20 because 20 fathoms was a string with 2 knots. 17 fathoms was a piece of red cloth, so they would do it that way. Now, interesting, what they would do is they would take that weight right there, and they would put the bottom of it with oil, because when they go to test it, they want to make sure they hit the ground. So if it came up and had debris on it, because that oil would catch the debris, then they know they hit the ground and that they had an accurate measurement. So that's what a fathom is there. Just thought that was kind of cool as I'm learning my sea stuff here.
It's 120 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, I already said that.
Oh.
And 15 fathoms is 90 feet. Okay? So now it says in Acts 27 verse 29, it says, "Then fearing lest they should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come." So let me ask you this. Who's praying here? It's the sailors. It's not Paul. Paul had already prayed. He'd already done it, okay? They're praying for daylight to come so that they can see if they have land or not, because they haven't been able to see anything for the longest time. They have no clue where they are. Okay? And then it says in verse 30 and 32, Acts 27:30, "And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes from the skiff and let it fall off. The stern is in the back of the ship, the prow is in the front of the ship, just so you know, okay? But I want you to see what's going on here. Who is Paul?
Paul's acting as like.
He's a prisoner. And now, not only is he commanding we'll see the ship, he's commanding the Roman military. And he says, listen, if they leave the ship, you guys are going to die. And so the military is going to respond to Paul here. It's pretty powerful. If the sailors bail, you're dead. And you think about it, why would they bail on a Roman military? Because they're hired hands. So I'm out. Peace out. Bye, guys. I'm not invested in this anymore. I'm out. We're close to land. I'm going to get on the skip and move. But they would have died had they done that. Okay? And you can look at it and say, okay, well, that's a contradiction because God said he's going to get them through. But again, God's sovereignty and man's decision go hand in hand. Yes, God said he would get them through if they stayed on the boat. You got to ride through the storm. If you bail out in the middle of the storm, you're not going to be promised victory in that area. You're not going to be promised to be delivered. The promise is stay in the boat, stay through the storm. Don't abandon ship. That's the promise. And he will see you through it. He will see you through it. We have to stay on course, church. You have to stay on the journey that he's put you on. You have to. If you stop, the promises stop. You're like, well, that's a contradiction. No, listen. The promise of deliverance for you, for in the midst of that storm, is null and void if you do not stay in the boat. Stay on the ship. Go through the storm. But there are promises. We have to follow through. We have to stay on track. Can't jump ship. We have to ride the storm out, church. You guys going through a storm? Ride it out. Don't jump ship. Don't throw your hands and say, I'm done with God. Which we've all done. Well, most of us. Me included. He says in Acts 27, verse 32 through 34, "Then the soldiers, listening to Paul, cut away the ropes of the skiff." That's their lifeboat. That's the way out. The military is taking their only way out and taking that option off the table. They cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all. Now he's commanding the whole ship. Take food, saying, today is the 14th day, and you have waited and continued without food, and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. So now Paul is commanding the Roman the ship, the captain, the sailors, the soldiers, the centurion. He's doing all of that. And they cut off the rope of the skiff, their lifeline. But notice how practical Paul is. He's urging them just to eat. You guys have been seasick before. You haven't eaten 14 days. Guys, stop and let's eat. Let's give thanks to the Lord for the deliverance that we don't see yet. In fact, what did we see? We saw our only chance of survival cut away, the skiff. So let's stop, let's eat, let's give thanks to God for what he's about to do. And he's not giving things after. He's in the midst of the trial, in the midst of the storm. Take nourishment, you need to eat. He says in verse 35, and when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. So Paul says, guys, eat. Fill up. And then he thanks God. He starts to worship God in the midst of all of this stuff. And he takes the lead. He's the first one to break bread and eat. Eat, guys. Follow my example. Do as I'm doing. Thank God before you see the deliverance. Because he's got it. He's going to get you through. Okay? This is so important because hear me, guys, hear me really clearly. You're going to be on a ship that's going through a storm in your life. And there are going to be people around you who don't know the Lord. And they're going to see you as a representative of the Lord. And you're going to have an opportunity in that moment to be a light, to thank God for what he's about to do before he does it. And then they're all going to see God do it and give him glory. And it's in those times of trial that you and I are in that most people who are on the sidelines or maybe in the storm with us, that is the time that God will take the iron of our heart and he begins to just melt it so that we have an opportunity to be a witness for the Lord. Because I can guarantee you these Roman soldiers and these sailors had never, ever seen something like this before. And the fact that God sent an angel to this guy and he's given him a word and he's thanking him before the deliverance, before it happens, and they've never seen this. They're seeing Christianity 101 for the first time. Well, he goes on and he says in verse 36 through 38, and we're almost done. Then they were all encouraged. After they ate, they're all encouraged. Think about it. The soldiers whose lifeline was just cut away, they're encouraged. And also took food themselves. And in all, we were, listen to this, 276 persons on that ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. And this is really important for us to know too, okay? What they threw into the ocean was their livelihood. They were throwing their money into the sea. Their money couldn't save them. Just want you to be aware of that. Verse 39 through 44. And we're wrapping it up. When it was day, they did not recognize the land. But they observed a bay with a beach onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go of the anchors and left them in the sea. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where the two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept the soldiers from their purpose, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. And that is the end of that chapter. Now, there's just a couple things I want to pull out here as we close. The ship's destroyed, okay? I want to be aware that the soldiers are ready to kill the prisoners. Now, why would the soldiers want to kill the prisoners? Because, think about it, the prisoners are going to Rome to be tried. And if a soldier, we've talked about this in the past, if a soldier, if a prisoner got out and escaped, the person who's guarding that prisoner would get the punishment that the prisoner was to get. So if the guy was going to get 10 years in jail, the guard would got 10 years in jail. The fact that they wanted to kill them tells me that these are probably non-Roman citizens, apart from Paul, and that they've been guilty of some kind of crime that would be the penalty of death, and therefore they're going to kill these guys so that they don't get the penalty themselves. But who intervenes?
Commander.
The commander, the centurion. The centurion. And again, Paul's the Roman citizen here. Those guys probably are not, but I love that Paul is able to spare the Roman centurion and everyone on the boat, and then the Roman centurion is able to spare Paul. That God's able to sovereignly work through all of that. Now, I will close with this last scripture here. Acts 27 verse 44 says this. Some on boards, and I just want to say that some came surfing on boards from the ship to the land. Here's a biblical thing about surfing, just so you know. Not really. Just like the Bible says, do not fret, so playing guitar, which I do, is a sin. Kidding, not true. But they came in on boards. Now, what we're going to find out as we end next week in Acts chapter 28 is there's going to be a huge revival that happens on this island. This island that's right at the foot, right below Italy. Okay, but listen to me. God always fulfills His promises. Always. He always fulfills His promises. So for us, all we have to do is just to hang on to Him. You guys receive that?
Yeah.
Let's pray. Father, we just want to say thank you so much for your love and for your grace and for your mercy and for all the things that you do and all the things that you have accomplished, Lord. And we know that trials are brutal. They're hard. And sometimes we want to abandon ship because it's scary. God, help us to stay on track. Help us to get through the trial, Lord, instead of trying to get out of it. I just pray that you would minister to us, that you would love us, that you would pour yourself into us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thanks, guys.